Welcome to Crying Out Loud. I'm Dr. Laura Berman, and this is your grief companion. Join me to learn how to soften the pain, steady the nervous system, and connect to your loved ones on the other side. None of us were meant to grieve alone. So let's cry out loud together.
So I'm crying out loud. I'm not holding it in. I'm shrinking my heart.
In this episode of Crying Out Loud, I'm sharing a beautiful conversation with the amazing Dr. Gabor Maté that helped me better understand not only grief, but healing itself. Dr. Maté is a physician, a best-selling author, an internationally respected expert on trauma, addiction, stress, and the mind-body connection. His work has transformed the way so many of us understand the impact our life experiences have had on our emotional and physical health and how healing, true healing, happens. One of the things grief has taught me is that loss rarely exists in isolation. The death of someone we love often touches other wounds, long buried emotions, and patterns of coping that we may have carried since childhood. It can bring us face to face with parts of ourselves that we didn't even realize were hurting. In this conversation, Dr. Mate helps us understand how our earliest experiences shape the way we relate to ourselves, our bodies, our relationships, and our pain. We explore the connection between trauma and illness and the physical cost of chronic stress, why learning to say no is essential to our well being, and what guilt can teach us about the ways we abandon ourselves. We also talk about the gifts and challenges of being a sensitive child in a world that doesn't always know how to nurture sensitivity. Most importantly, Dr. Mate offers a powerful perspective on healing. He reminds us that healing is not about fixing what is broken. It's about reconnecting with the parts of ourselves we had to leave behind in order to survive. It's a return to wholeness. So, if grief has ever made you wonder why certain losses affect you so deeply, why old pain resurfaces when you're grieving, or how healing can coexist with heartbreak, I think you're going to find a great deal of wisdom in this conversation with Dr. Gabor Mate. I am so grateful to have you here, Dr. Mate. Do you like being called Gabor, Dr. Mate? What's your preference?
Gabor.
Gabor. Okay. The book is The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. And to me, like, the big headline here, which is so important and is inherent in the title, is what we think of as normal, right? And also those things that we aspire to celebrate and reinforce in our society is really rather toxic, right? And goes back to our collective traumas, our consumerism, our capitalistic ideals that create competition and division instead of collaboration and connection. But, you obviously have said this so much more eloquently than I am right now. But can you explain that just as a baseline so that we all understand what we're talking about when we say the myth of normal?
Sure. So usually you conflate or confuse the idea of normal with what is healthy and natural, which of course there's a certain basis because in medicine, I'm trained as a physician. When we talk about a normal range of temperature, we're talking about the body temperature range within which human beings can live and outside of which we die. If it's too high or too low, we don't exist. Within the normal range, it's healthy and natural. Now we make the mistake of thinking that, well, so what we used to then is also what's healthy and natural. Now, we make this mistake, though, of transposing that to our idea of society. So the things that we're used to, that we consider normal, we think are also healthy and natural. But as you've just summarized, many of the things that we're used to as norms in our society are actually neither healthy or natural. In fact, they run quite contrary to our needs as human beings. So what we have to understand is human beings evolved over millions and hundreds of thousands of years with certain needs, built-in needs. If those needs are met, we thrive. If they're not, we don't. And what I'm saying is that today's culture, in many ways, tramples on and denies some essential human needs. And that's a source of much pathology. And so when we consider diseases of the body and mind as abnormalities, I'm saying they're actually normal responses to abnormal circumstances.
Let's dig into that a little bit because, like, for instance, you really get into, I mean, guys, this, like, I like to geek out, and I was geeking out because, reading this book because there's so much, evidence, and you lay out the science so beautifully, and, you sort of tell the story, you kind of spread it out for us and walk us through it. But you make a pretty good argument for the idea that illness, and let's just talk about physical illness for a moment. We'll get to mental issues in a minute, but that physical illness, especially chronic illness and disease, is a result of trauma. I love the examples you gave of obituaries, right? And how, those things that we celebrate about people in their obituaries, is how they have no ego or how they tirelessly continued all of their family responsibilities, even while battling stage 4 cancer, these ways in which and then you kind of go over the risk factors, right, for illness. And there are things like, identification with social role and duty, and automatic and compulsive concern for the emotional needs and for others, overdriven, externally focused, repression of healthy aggression or anger, harboring, acting out the belief that I'm responsible for how other people feel. I can't disappoint anyone, that these are common denominators, and you really lay out this argument for chronic illness. Am I summarizing that correctly?
Well, you summarized it very succinctly. In family practice, in which I worked for over 20 years, and then 7 years of palliative care work before I went into addiction work, I noticed that there are certain personality patterns that people with chronic illness had. And as a family physician, I had an advantage over my specialist colleagues because I knew people before they got sick.
Mm.
So I got who got, I saw who got ill. And also in palliative care, I saw the personalities of the people that were dying of chronic illness. And they're just what you outlined, essentially an abandonment of self for the sake of pleasing and serving others while ignoring one's own needs. And there's the expression in English, the good die young. Well, they
Mhm.
often do, because what we consider to be goodness often amounts to suppression of self. Now, the traits that you outlined, sacrificing for others, ignoring your own needs, repressing out the anger, when you look at the major genders in our society, which gender is expected to be like that? It's women. Their
Yeah.
culture. That's why physicians, we don't seem to understand why 80% of autoimmune disease happens to women. Rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, colitis, Crohn's disease, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and so on and so forth. In fact, there's a lot of evidence, first of all, scientifically, that these are related to these emotional traits. And secondly, it's women who are expected to be that way. And that's
Yes.
why women who are expected to absorb the stresses of everybody else, and so it's women who suffer most autoimmune illness. And if you're a woman of color or in Canada, an indigenous woman, even more oppressed, even more suppressed, you're going to have even more autoimmune disease. And so what's missing here from from the point of medicine is that even though some great pioneers of medicine have for 150 years pointed out these observations, and we have 100 years of deep science showing the relationship, the oneness of mind and body, Western medicine separates the mind from the body. So, for example, I know that you've served on a faculty of obstetrical faculty of a university. So lots of studies have shown, for example, that um, women sexually abused are much more likely to have endometriosis.
Yes.
A study out of Harvard showed 3 years ago that women with severe PTSD have double the risk of ovarian cancer. Yet, woman goes to a gynecologist with any of these problems, nobody's going to ask them about stresses or traumas in their lives. Which
I know, it's so crazy to me. And even educating, when I was on the faculty there and even at UCLA, a big part of my role was educating the medical students.
yeah,
And they just are, they barely gave me any time because,
yeah,
that the mental health piece isn't that important. but they had no real understanding and it was not at all integrated into the intake. I mean, I always ask women when I talk to women, groups of women, when they go to the OBGYN, not only are they not asked about their stresses, their past trauma, and I wanna put a pin in that because a lot of women are defensive about that because they've been told one too many times that their problems are all in their heads. That's not what we're saying, guys. We aren't saying that your issues aren't true medical conditions, and that they're, in your mind and that you're crazy. We're not saying that. But people, kind of get defensive because that's what they're expecting. But also the doctors, especially in this country, have 5 minutes with managed care. So they're not asked about their mental health. They're also not ever, they never get, I know this isn't your expertise, Gabor, but they never get asked or look, they never even have their clitoris looked at. Like, they look inside, but they never look at the outside. And the clitoris is like, so I have all these women who have sexual dysfunction, and none of them have ever been asked about any of this or had their clitoris examined, which often there are real medical issues there too. But that's a side note. Uh,
Yeah, not to mention, I know that you're a relationship expert. When a woman has a problem or anybody has a problem, it's reduced to the isolated individual.
yes,
But a sexual problem doesn't happen in isolation, it happens in a relationship. And so
absolutely.
it's not just a question of a biological here's the point. It's not a question that's in your head. The biology can't be separated from the mind. The human mind and human body are one unit. Science has shown that.
Yes.
So certain conditions like endometriosis, you can have pathological findings. You can identify certainly ovarian cancer. There's pathology there that you can identify. But even in a case when there isn't, such as, pain on intercourse
Yeah.
or irritable bowel syndrome, where you can't find certain physical evidence, it's still physiological.
Yeah.
And that's because of the mind and the body can't be separated. And we're what's called biopsychosocial creatures, which means that our biology is inseparable from our emotions and from our social relationships because our emotions happen in social relationships. So that the average physician just is not prepared to understand any of that because their training completely misses it. So
Yeah.
lots of studies, for example. Well, let me give you another female-related example. The rate of multiple sclerosis in the 1930s was about 1 to 1. For each man, for one man diagnosed, there'd be a woman. Now it's 3.5 women to every man. What does that mean? It
Yeah.
means,
What does that mean?
well, you can't understand it if you look at it strictly as isolated biology, because biology doesn't change over 80 years. So genes don't change over 80 years. The climate and the diet didn't change more for one gender than the other. What has changed? If you recognize that since multiple sclerosis was first described in 1870 by a French neurologist whose name was Charcot, and Jean-Martin Charcot said that this is a disease caused by worry and stress. Now, since then, there's been lots of evidence relating childhood trauma, adult stresses to the onset of multiple sclerosis. Stress inflames the nervous system. It's that simple, or well, almost that simple. And
Mhm.
we've had lots of evidence. Know why women 3.5 times? Because what's happened is that the stress on women has increased in the last 80 years. How so?
Yes.
They've always played the roles in this culture of being the shock absorbers, the stress absorbers of their families and their spouses.
Yes.
So that, when a woman takes the medication for depression or anxiety, you know what they're doing? They're taking the medication for both themselves and their spouse
Yes.
because the
That is
anxiety,
true. I've
because the
often
anxiety
thought about that.
Yeah, so the anxiety and stress and depression happens in the context of a relationship. So women have played that role of being the shock absorbers, the stress absorbers, but now, since the Second World War especially, they've also had to play a role in the economic life of the family, either because the family needs it. I mean, 25% of American women, this is shocking, have to go back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth, which is unbelievable. Um, for economic reasons. And some women legitimately just want to be out there contributing and expressing themselves.
Yeah, and they're
As-
fulfilled. Like me, I was working, for I mean, I wanted the money too, but it was for fulfillment. Yes.
Absolutely. Which is totally
But it's
legitimate.
still even working, you still and there are all those studies that show that even, working both partners working, it's the woman that has the bulk of the responsibility for the home and the children on
That's the
top of
point.
work, even though they're both working full time.
That's the point I'm making. So now you
Yeah.
double the responsibility, but you haven't shared the stress. And
Yes.
and then number 3, there's more isolation now. Family
Yes.
issues so you double the stress, you isolate people. It's gonna be the gender who's carrying all that, who's gonna have more multiple sclerosis.
Yeah,
And not
and other chronic diseases. I mean, I've talked a lot. I had breast cancer, and it's I'm such a perfect poster child for what you're teaching because my mother died of breast cancer, what was ultimately breast cancer, and I was completely beside myself, devastated. It was the greatest loss I could ever imagine at that point in my life. And this was about 11, 12 years ago. And within a year, I went right back to work. I was filming a show for OWN. I was, going to just like, okay, I'm just going to work it away. I'll not really feel my feelings. I don't have time for that. And within a year, I had breast cancer in the same breast she did with no risk factors. It just was like came on suddenly. Mammogram was clear the year before. All next year riddled with breast cancer in the left breast and had to go have a mastectomy and chemo and everything else and had to stop my life. And you write a lot in your book about, you allude to this, but this idea that I often speak of it in terms of the gift of cancer, and how when the body can't get through to us in other ways, it
yeah,
sometimes gets through to us in disease. And that really is what happened to me. That I had to stop my life for the first time in my adult life. I was
it's
forced to.
a previous book of mine is entitled "When the Body Says No." So
Yes.
when you don't know how to say no, literally your body will say it for you. And
Yes.
breast cancer is a typical example. No, a small percentage of breast cancers are genetically potentiated, but out of 100 women, I take it you didn't have the gene yourself, did you?
No, I did
Yeah.
not have any genetic risk factor.
Out of 100 women with the breast cancer, 7 will have the gene, 93 will not. And
Yeah.
in all those cases, it's literally the body saying no,
Yeah.
and because the woman has been
The woman won't say no. Yeah, and that's what I learned to do, and one of the greatest gifts, and it's even compounded over the past couple of years with my more recent trauma that we'll get to in a minute, but that is was the gift, and you talk a lot and you write a lot in your book about all of these beautiful examples, not only of what seem like miraculous healings from terminal illness that happen, and our mutual friend, Anita Morjani, writes about
yeah,
this in her work as well. Her healing happened when we decide not only to start saying, setting those boundaries and no longer being the shock absorbers and really attending to our emotional well being, but also when we are able to heal those deep wounds that
yeah,
set the foundation for abandoning yourself, being a shock absorber, over pleasing everyone else, under attending to your own emotional needs, living in isolation, taking on the weight of the world on your shoulders, and all of those things we learn through our, traumas, our big T traumas, but also all those little T traumas that happen to us early in childhood, right?
So essentially, here's the thing. You've been a mother of 3 children. Have you ever met a one-day-old baby that doesn't express their needs?
No.
Ever met a one-day-old baby that doesn't know how to say no?
No, they don't know how to say it, but they let you know.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Try feeding them something they don't want.
Yeah.
Suppression of that healthy no. And by the way, what's the word that kids start saying compulsively at age 1.5?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Why? Why does nature do that? Why doesn't nature say to the kid, "Come on, just say yes"? "Hey, time for dinner." "Yes."
Yeah.
There's a reason for it. 'Cause unless we learn how to say no, our yeses don't mean anything at all.
Say
You
that
see?
again. That was a good one.
Well, unless we know how to say no, our yeses don't mean anything.
Yes.
Now, so we have to say no to set a boundary for ourselves so we can decide what we want and what we don't want. So we're born with that capacity. Why do we lose it? Because we learn that our families, our parents, bless their hearts with all the love they may have for us and do have and all the best that they can do for us. They're kind of relying on us to meet their needs by suppressing our own.
Mhm.
And this happens sometimes overtly in homes where there's alcoholism. Sometimes it happens more subtly if the parents are stressed or traumatized. The child will pick up on that and suppress themselves, not to bother the parent too much, to be able to be more acceptable to the parent. So the point is, or more specifically, if the parents follow the utterly stupid parenting advice of a lot of so-called parenting experts about how child's anger and so on needs to be suppressed and punished,
Yes.
then the child learns to fit in. I better be a pleaser. I better serve other people's needs. So it becomes a survival mechanism for the sake of maintaining the attachment relationship with the parents. The child gives up their own self. And they do so unconsciously. And now they carry this automatic self suppression into their adult lives. And it becomes their so called personality, their so called second nature. But notice the phrase second nature implies something. It was never your first nature. It's your
Yes.
true self. And often, as in your case, and the case of many other people I've known, disease comes along as kind of a teacher. I don't recommend it, by the way,
No,
people. I don't recommend,
neither.
but it can serve like that. So people have
Yes.
to wake up and say, and the disease becomes like almost like a route back to themselves. That's what happened to Anita and Murjani.
Yeah.
Um, that's what I take happened to you. That's what I and those are the fortunate ones, where the disease isn't just seen as a terrible misfortune. Not that again, either you and I would recommend that to anybody, but if it happens, it can wake you up.
Yeah.
The whole idea is to wake up before the disease happens.
Yes, that would be the goal. And, I want to talk about this whole idea of how we fuck up our kids because I was reading the bulk of your book. I had already started it, but the bulk of it, because I knew we were having this conversation, I read while both my kids were home over Thanksgiving. And I had to keep looking up and being like, I'm so sorry. And I know you work so hard in this book. I think you must have said it, 80 times in 80 different ways that we shouldn't feel guilty and that you aren't here to push guilt. But boy, did I sure as poop feel guilty. Because, I know obviously, and I've said this to my kids since they were little, that we have the best intentions. I used to say to them, look, I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying as hard as I can. Everything I'm doing with love. And I know I'm still screwing you up. So I'm just trying, doing the best I can here. But because we project, our own unresolved traumas and our social repression and our social expectations and our fears, we almost parent against our fear. And I was one. I have to admit, I'm ashamed, but I was one of those parents who we had this pediatrician in Chicago when my two youngest were really, were babies. They were 14 months apart. And this doctor was like the best pediatrician in town. And he wrote a book about sleep training, and he had this whole program around sleep training. And I let my kids, I was one of those parents you describe in the
Not,
book
not, not, not,
who let my
not Dr.
kids
Ferber.
cry, and I was a good student and wanted to do what the doctor said, and I came from a medical family, and you listen to what the doctor said. Woo!
Yeah.
I felt so bad
Well,
because
look,
they need that connection.
you're not talking about Ferber, are you?
No, it wasn't Ferber,
Yeah.
although he might as well have been Ferber. Um, you know
Yeah, but look, so first of all, as a parent, I used to do the same thing, and as a doctor, I used to advocate the same
You
thing.
did? Alright,
No,
that makes me
uh,
not feel as bad.
yeah, I did. No, no, as a family physician, I did until I learned better, you know,
Yeah.
because I realized human infants have a need to connect physically with the parent. You tell a mother gorilla not to pick up their kid when they're crying,
Yeah.
look what's going to happen. So basically, we go against their own instincts when they don't pick up our kids. But as a doctor, I would tell people, oh no, just let them sleep it off. Damaging to the child because the message the child gets is that they don't matter and their feelings
Yeah,
don't
and
matter.
that their needs won't be met and that you're not safe and that they have to repress, they have to give up or become apathetic, right? And just, like, accept that
And
their fear and sadness doesn't matter.
that's why they go back to sleep because they become apathetic. No,
Oh, that makes me
no,
so sad.
yeah, but listen, first of all, I did my best. You did your best. We all did. So guilt is displaced here. We're not blaming anybody here. We're looking at a whole culture in
Yeah.
which parents are trying to parent against odds. But let me ask you, And furthermore, I would say even more provocatively, your guilt has nothing to do with your kids. So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
When in your life, if I may,
Of course.
when in your life have you not felt guilty?
Oh, guilt is one of my we gotta talk about guilt. Guilt
Okay.
is definitely one of my close companions and was a massive tool of control that my parents used.
Okay, stay with me for a minute then. So when in your life have you not felt guilty? Never, right?
Yeah, never.
Okay, right. That means that the guilt was yours long before you had kids.
Yeah. No, it definitely was.
Okay, so where does that guilt come from? Okay, you know what the guilt comes from? Because you failed as a child.
Yeah.
What did you fail at? You failed to make your parents happy.
Yes, I did many times.
Yeah.
And then I
Was it?
put
No, no,
myself into a pretzel to make them happy, but yes.
yeah. No. Was it ever a child's job to make your parents happy? Should ever be a child's job?
No.
Okay. So you were given I was, and you were, and a lot of kids are given an impossible job, which should never be theirs, to make their parents happy. We fail at that because their happiness is not in our hands.
No.
So inevitably we fail, and then we feel guilty. So your guilt came along long before you had kids. So your guilt
Yeah.
is not so when people talk about their guilt about as parenting, I said, listen, I get it. I have a remorse too about what I did or didn't do when I was a parent or when my kids were small. But the guilt, that corrosive feeling of guilt, that's got nothing to do with you as a parent. It's got to do with you as a child who were given a job you should never have been given. That's what it
Yeah.
comes down.
So stay with me on guilt for a little bit. And you write a lot about guilt and I love how you sort of, refer to it as you thinking about guilt as just like a stupid friend, right? That isn't getting the memo that that's something like you're saying, that's a very old message that was put on you versus something you really deserve. But, and when we were about to start this interview, you immediately made me cry. Or I immediately cried. You didn't make me cry. But when you asked about my how I was handling the loss of my son, Sammy, who died from fentanyl poisoning. And as you can imagine, I thought of him, a million and 20 times while reading this book. And, as my husband, who is handles his grief and guilt differently. He says, look, the one job we have as parents is to keep our kids alive. And I didn't do that, right? Like that in his mind is his great failing. I think I have some of that too. But for me, it's more, you write like, because our middle one, Sammy, who died, was all of my kids actually were bullied a lot. But he especially was really bullied and, I thought about that as I was reading because you talk about how the kids that are susceptible, like if I understand you correctly, the kids wouldn't because it really affected him. And he was kind of like Jesse Thistle, who you wrote about you wrote about the book. He wrote a memoir from the ashes about his own substance abuse. And Sammy was just starting to experiment, but he did share with me he was severely bullied, and the only kids that would hang out with him or give him the time of day were the druggy kids. And he would beg me, like, can I smoke pot? Can I, because this is the only way these kids will hang out with me. And this guy, Jesse Thistle, kind of said the same thing that substance use gave him access to friends, which on some level our son was doing, which is why he accepted the Snapchat menu from that drug dealer. But if I understood you correctly, the kids wouldn't necessarily be so over identified or susceptible to the pain of bullying if their primary relationship with their parents were more emotionally attuned.
Right. So first of all, I didn't know Sammy, but here's what I would guess about him. He must have been one of these highly sensitive kids.
He was, yes,
Probably,
very.
probably supremely sensitive, probably very spontaneous and creative and capable of great joy, um, the playfulness.
Yes.
Um, is that what he was like?
He was, which and adults adored him, but kids
That's what I'm
never
saying.
understood him.
Exactly. He did any attention problems.
Yes. All my kids, which also I was cringing about because you talk a lot of I know you've written books, on ADHD, but
Oh,
yes, all
my first book was on that after I was diagnosed with it myself.
yes.
So I know that condition from the inside out. Um, So these kids, because they're sensitive, they're capable of greater feeling and intuition, insight, and creativity, but they're also prone to greater pain.
Yes.
So they're more likely to be hurt. Now,
Mhm.
an essential need of the child is the safe, attuned connection with the parent. When parents are stressed, distracted by their own traumas or their own careers or their own relationship issues or stresses in their culture, I mean, again, to make it personal so that nobody feels blamed. I was a really good doctor and I was highly respected and I was a workaholic. And my focus was very much on my contribution to the world. Why was that? Because as an infant, as a Jewish infant in Hungary, I was given the message that the world didn't want me under the Nazis. And I don't have to go into the details, but that's what happened.
Yeah, no, I think actually I loved that part of your story. I thought it was so powerful. Not only were you an infant and a child during, Nazi when the Nazis were and your grandparents were killed in a concentration camp, but your mother, to save your life, gave you to another family for a while.
Exactly. So the message I get is I wasn't wanted. Now,
Yeah.
one way I compensate for that later on, because I haven't resolved that trauma yet, is that I make myself wanted. How do you do that? By becoming a good doctor who's available for everybody. What message do my kids get? That they're not wanted because dad's not around.
Right,
So
and that their needs aren't important.
now the child needs that connection with the parent, that attuned, grounded connection with the parent. When a child can't get it from the parents, they'll seek it from the peer group. Now they're desperate to be accepted and loved by the peer group. And I talk about that in this book, The Myth
Yeah.
Normal. I've also written another book about that called Hold On to Your Kids, why parents need to matter more than peers. And
Mhm.
these children who become bullied are the ones who um, are desperate to be accepted, but they're lacking the confidence in themselves that could only come from relationship with the parents. Now, I'm not blaming the parents here because two of my kids were bullied as well. So,
Yeah.
again, I'm not blaming anybody else. I'm just saying that's what happened. So, your son, Sammy, one of these really sensitive kids, uh, probably lacking something, not because you didn't love him, but because of issues that you've talked about very openly.
Yeah.
Maybe you weren't as available for him as much as he needed you to be. He then goes to the peer group for that connection and then falls victim to the peer dynamic. And then, in order to belong, he does these drugs. And then he gets on Snapchat, which is, or any one of these terrible. There's a new book reviewed in the New York Times just last week about how the pernicious influence of these tech companies on kids, how they addict these kids to the
Yes, they
products.
do.
And so your son falls into that pit, and then he gets a hold of some drug. He's got no idea, and next thing, he overdoses, and it's very painful for parents. But I think it's essential for us to recognize what was missing for these kids.
And I
Attunement.
tried so hard, like, I read, that's always been my joke that as a therapist and, and someone who deals with adults, and so much of my work is helping them unpack exactly what you're talking about. Because I see things view this the same way you do. Whenever with someone's struggling in a relationship or, has these stories about their partner or these triggers that trigger them, I know it's always related to those early life experiences they had and
Yeah.
their sense of worthiness of love, right? That's what it always comes down to. And I tried so hard, like, I was so invested, and I really before I had kids, I stupidly thought, "Okay, if I just do everything right, if I just, say the right things and teach them the gender acceptance and, I tell them how wonderful they are and I invest." And even though I'm working a lot, I have these girlfriends who are stay-at-home moms, and they don't even play with their kids. They're dragging their kids around all day long on errands and don't actually ever sit on the floor and play with them. They're just dragging them. And I sit for at least an hour a day in child-centered play, and I'm spending and asking them about their lives, and I know all their friends. And, I was trying so hard. And despite all of that, right, I still
Well,
fucked them up.
well, because by the way, often when I talk to parent groups and somebody says I'm worried about that I screwed up my kids. I always say to people, don't worry about screwing up with kids. Of course you have. We all do
Yeah.
that. But the issue here, Laura, is not just what we do right, but who we are when we're doing it. And
Okay. So talk about that. What do you mean?
well, there's never any question that I love my kids. I mean, I would have thrown myself into a fire for them. But the problem was nobody ever needed me to throw myself into a fire. What they needed me to be is to be emotionally present with them, really
Yeah.
good with them. And because of my own distractions, ADHD mind, um, unresolved traumas, and relationship issues with my spouse, I couldn't be grounded and attuned. So I was with them, played with them, but I couldn't really be present to who they were. You
Yeah.
know, it just wasn't in me. You know, and sensitive kids, they pick up on that.
Yeah, why do you think so many sensitive kids are being born? It feels like because I feel like I'm my kids, but also all the kids, I see them. I see like Sammy when he was little, if I took him to the circus or one of those concerts, he would look at me and go like, "Mommy, too much noise." Like he was so sensorily attuned, like his senses were so much more highly, he was more sensitive. My other kids too. What do you think that's about? Is that,
Well,
I have lots of spiritual theories about why that is, but I'm curious what your theory is or why you think that might be happening.
Well, first of all, my son Daniel, with whom I wrote this book, The Myth of
Yeah.
Knowledge, was one of these kids. Then, of course, he turned out to be a musically extraordinarily talented,
Yeah.
creative person who's had his challenges, as an adult. Um, well, I think sensitivity is a benefit to humankind. Given the right circumstances, sensitive people are more intuitive, they're more creative. Um,
Yeah.
they they become leaders, they become artists, they become shamans, they become priests, they become writers.
And they're also the canaries in the coal mine.
Yeah, they can warn us of what's going on. They are
Yeah.
connected. So I think a certain percentage of kids are born like that. The issue is not why are more kids being born sensitive. The issue is why are these kids, sensitive kids, suffering so much more than they used to. You know, Yeah. And that has to do with the nature of our culture, because our culture basically hurts these kids. The way we parent, the stress that parents are facing, what happens to them in school, what
Mhm.
happens to them in the peer group. So it's not so much that more kids are born sensitive, it's that that sensitivity is insulted in so
Yeah.
many ways by the
Yes.
culture that we live in. I think that's what's actually going on right now.
Yeah, I thought I was really touched. I mean, I've read It Takes a Village and, a lot about community parenting, but I loved the way that you were describing this, this idea of normally in our human history, it's only been in recent human history that we live in such isolation from community, but in the way we're designed is that there are all sorts of people there to take your kid when you need a break or to get up with them in the middle of the night. 'Cause that's what I was thinking about, like, I was so exhausted, even when I wasn't working. I was so exhausted with these 24-hour need machines,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
there's very but that's not what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to be alone with our kids. We're supposed to have a whole community coming in and bringing food and taking the kid from us and watching the kids so we can go out with our partners and be with our partners and so we can get some sleep and so we can get some rest and we can get some distance, and that's not how our world is designed anymore.
No, so how we evolved over millions and then hundreds of thousands of years is in small band hunter-gatherer groups for all those conditions for what's called allo parenting. Allo means other, so other parents coming along to parent your child. That's what it actually used to work. And even the existence of our own species, Homo sapiens, we've been on the earth for 200,000 years until 15,000 years ago. All of us lived in small band hunter-gatherer groups, which means that if our own species has been around for an hour, then until 5 minutes ago, we lived in those communal settings. That's what we're designed for. And in today's culture, isolation, alienation, dislocation, and loneliness are epidemics in the last 40 years, especially. So what's happening is that parents are struggling in an almost impossible environment to provide to their children what nature wants them to provide to their children, but the culture is making it so difficult. And that's one of the reasons I say that we're living in a toxic culture, because it just doesn't meet human needs. It meets all kinds of physical needs, and
Right. but
not
not emotional and heart-centered and human needs
or spiritual, you know?
or spiritual needs.
It does.
And I wanna ask you about the spiritual piece in a minute, but let's just I wanna talk about healing because you do spend, a good bit in the book, and I know you've written other books that address this, and starting with the guilt thing, right? Because I thought your discussion about how to move with guilt, and I share your philosophy 100% of that which you can't be with, this is my paraphrasing, not you, but that which you can't be with is going to run your life. And it's not about separating ourselves out from our guilt or our shame or our trauma. That just makes it worse. It's about really becoming friends with it and loving because they really represent those younger parts of ourselves that are hurt or scared and those parts of ourselves that are you know, quote unquote dysfunctional are really expressions are really those parts of ourselves that are trying to express or those dysfunctional attempts we made as sweet innocent children who thought that everything that happened to us was because of us, right? We come up with these strategies to keep ourselves safe or to
Yeah.
keep our parents happy or to get the love or approval we needed because we confused love with approval. And so that just kind of sticks, right? And guilt, we've already discussed for me, but for millions of people, is a really constant companion.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you can share how to work with those pieces of ourselves and how to you know how to make friends with them.
You and I are both Jewish, I think. Have you heard the Jewish definition of Alzheimer's disease?
No, what is it?
You forget everything but the guilt.
That sounds about right. And that's true. When my grandmother was really starting to spiral with dementia, she went off the rail. We were extremely close. And unfortunately, a very nefarious family member kind of, when someone first started losing their mind, they're very impressionable. And this person started telling her all these random, weird, horrible things about me. And she just went off the rails on me. And I was really hurt, but I understood. And I just kind of backed off. Well, fast forward a month, and this was like right at the precipice of when she was really losing it. And I was fixing her hair for my cousin's wedding, and she stopped and she barely knew anything. She knew who I was. And she turned to me and she's like, "I'm really sorry. I know I did something bad, but I don't know what it is." And it
Oh,
just totally broke my heart.
no. Oh, no. Well, so the point about guilt and if we recognize that, first of all, as you said earlier, the guilt's been your companion all your life, then you have to ask, well, why did it come along? Because you weren't born with it, you know?
Yeah.
And it was yours long before you really could have done anything that bad when you were a small child.
Yeah.
So what I said earlier, it's actually about you're not meeting your parents' needs and expectations. Now, the child, as also you indicated earlier, takes everything personally. So children in that sense are narcissistic. And I don't mean in a negative sense of disorder. I just
Yeah.
mean they think it's all about them.
Yeah.
So when things are going great, hey, I must be a great person. My parents are stressed, unhappy. If they're angry with me, it's got to be my fault. And
Mhm.
that's a defense mechanism for two reasons. One is if I feel guilty enough, then I'll comply with my parents' expectations, and that'll maintain a relationship on which my life depends.
Yes.
But there's another side to it, even deeper. As a child, if your parents are not capable of giving you, not that they don't love you, because they do, not capable of giving you the love that you need, which is being seen and heard and understood,
And
and
accepted for exactly who you are.
exactly accepted for exactly who you are, you can tell yourself two stories unconsciously. One is, my parents are incapable of loving me the way I need to be. I'm all alone. That's one belief you can take on. Or you can take on the belief is, this is all my fault. And if I work hard enough, maybe I can make it
Yeah.
better.
Then there's something you can do, right? Then you're not totally alone because you can somehow save yourself, right? That's the myth.
That's the whole point. If so, the guilt then comes along, as you quoted me earlier, as this sort of stupid friend, this friend that wants to save your relationship with your parents and wants you to do better so that you can earn the love of the world. The stupidity comes in, as you said earlier. Also, it doesn't get the memo that you're not that helpless kid anymore, and you can take care of yourself in other ways. So when I f- when and so, for example, going back to your breast cancer and the difficulty saying no, when people don't know how to say no, one of the reasons is if they say no to other people's expectations, they're gonna feel guilty.
Mhm.
And what I say to them is, when you feel guilty, celebrate it. It means you're finally doing something for yourself. Have a party, you know, and call your friend,
That's a good
"Hey,
sign.
hey, I'm feeling guilty because I said
Mhm.
no." And I'm finally saying, because when you say no in that way, what you're actually doing is you're saying yes to yourself.
Yeah.
And as a child, you learned that you mustn't say yes to yourself
Right.
because
Not if
that's,
someone else wants you to say no to yourself, right? In order
yeah,
to meet their needs. So you can say yes as long as you're meeting other people's needs.
exactly. But other than
Yeah.
that, so that's the whole point. So I'm saying to people now, when the guilt arises, don't try and make it go away. Welcome it
Yeah.
as the friend that it's been all your life, who just, as you said, doesn't get the memo. So
Yeah.
that's one way of working with it.
Yeah, and I love how you say that healing is really about a natural movement toward wholeness, right? That it's
Yeah.
and I love this so much that it's really about self-retrieval rather than self-improvement.
Well,
Um,
and actually, the indigenous people in Canada, but also in the United States, they talk about soul retrieval.
yes,
So,
shamanic soul retrieval.
and it is about self retrieval because, as made clear in my discussion of trauma earlier in the book, is that the essence of trauma is disconnection from yourself. So the healing is becoming whole again, or reconnecting with yourself, with your true self. So,
Right, and with those parts of yourself that you squelched or repressed or ignored or left behind or made wrong
that's
in
right.
order to survive your childhood.
And with the truer self that's underneath all that. And so I've worked a lot with addiction. I worked with a highly addicted population here in Vancouver, and I've had my own addictive patterns in my life. I think most of us have, if not the
Mhm.
drugs, something. And we use this word recovery, when it comes to healing. No, language is interesting because what does it mean to recover something? It means to find it. But if you found it, it means it was never destroyed in the first place. So when you talk to people and you ask them, when you recovered, what did you find again? You know what they usually say? They say, I found myself. And that means
Yes.
that self that they found was never destroyed. You lost connection with it, you lost sight of it, you even lost belief that it exists. But when you find it, there it is, and you've recovered, you've healed. So healing is becoming whole again. It is recovering your true self, like you had to give up long ago in order to belong to a toxic culture.
Yeah, and a toxic family on some level because of the toxic culture. Um,
And families can be toxic, like mine was.
yeah.
I'm talking about me as a parent. A family can be toxic despite all the love of the parents.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's-
it's unintentional toxicity that just comes
yeah,
from emotional wounds and emotional immaturity of the parents,
that's
and
right. That's
it's hard to come to terms with. I'm telling you, it's hard to come to terms with, and maybe a lot of that is because I'm prone, as we've discussed, to guilt anyway. But, and I do know, like, I know intellectually, and I've had a lot of conversations with, grief healers about this, that there are millions and millions of parents who did the exact opposite of what I did and their kids died. And there are millions and millions of parents who did exactly what I think I should have or could have done and their kids died. And so in the end, it happens, right? And I may even have a role to play. I do have a role to play with it in it. We all did, whether we want that to be true or not. But it's a struggle to make friends with that aspect of guilt. And I do think, you talk a lot about healing. We won't get into all of it here. You guys definitely have to read the book. But one of the things that you get into, and it's come up a lot in this conversation, is this idea of a compassionate inquiry with yourself, or
right.
asking yourself, in what important areas of your life are you not saying no, right?
Yeah.
And how does not saying no impact your life, right?
Yes.
And what body signals have you been overlooking? A lot of your work, and mine too, um, when you talk about healing, is about sort of that somatic piece as well. Can you speak to that?
Well, as my friend Bessel van der Kolk says in the title of his book, a perennial New York Times bestseller,
I love this book.
the body keeps the score. Trauma isn't just an event. in the mind because the mind and the body can't be separated, as I keep stressing. So the traumatic imprints are carried in the body. And so when I work with people, through my compassion inquiry therapy modality, it's not just about the ideas and the emotions that you have in the abstract. It's about what are you carrying in your body, So sadness, anger, grief, repression, these all have their body physiological correlates because you can't separate the mind from the body. So it's very important to work with the body. In fact, you can't heal unless you do. So talking about something, as you said just a few minutes ago, intellectually understanding it is helpful, but it's not sufficient.
Mm-mm.
You have to work it through your whole being, and that's a challenge because unfortunately, a lot of therapists focus only on the ideas like you know, um, there's certain therapies that are very famous and very popular, but I think they're very shallow because they focus on the cognitive part, the part that we can understand intellectually. They don't deal with the body at all.
Yeah, I mean, I joke because my kids, when they were little, called me a talking doctor because I'm a therapist,
Yeah.
and now I say I'm a talking doctor who does a lot less talking because what I've come to realize over the past many years, and even in my own life immensely and intensely over the past couple of years as I healed from this huge trauma is that it all comes I mean, obviously, you have to think too and talk too, but it all there's only so much of that that's gonna resolve the trauma that it must move through, and I'm wondering if you can speak to this. I know you do in the book, this idea, because we want when this is part of the problem is that we tend to repress this stuff because we're so scared of it, and we imagine that there isn't a bottom. We don't really wanna go there to the feelings that our body needs to feel or process or release in order to heal because it's so freaking scary, right? And we imagine, which, spoiler alert or hint, it turns out not to be true, but we imagine that that's going to, that there'll be no bottom, that it will carry us away, that we'll lose ourselves, that it's so immense that it will swallow us whole. And
Well,
so how do you attend to that?
well, first of all, you have to validate that fear. And that fear is based on the original experience as a child. When you were a child and these things happened to you, it was unbearable.
Yeah,
It was more than you could handle. That's why you developed all these defense mechanisms.
that
So
makes
the
sense.
the the fear is totally valid. However, what I tell people is, first of all, it's never gonna be as bad as it was in the first place. You've already survived it. I got good news for you. That thing that you're afraid of, you've already survived it because here you are. And you survived it when you were helpless, resourceless, alone, vulnerable, and not particularly strong. Now here you are with help, with resources, with a much stronger sense of self. So while the fear is understandable given your original experience, the reality is never going to be as bad. It's gonna be painful perhaps, but
Mhm.
it's not gonna be as unbearable or unbearable at all as it was when you were a child. So that's the good news here.
Yeah. And I always like to say that, there is a bottom at each experience of the emotions. You're not gonna hit the bottom of the ocean, but you are gonna hit a sandbar.
Yeah,
You will find the ground, right? Once you start it's just that first step I found that once I really was brave enough to actually allow myself to process that which and feel that which I didn't want to feel, it was a short process. It only took 10 to 15 minutes to move that energy through and then the pressure valve released and then I felt lighter and then I could feel the ground under my feet and I could immediately feel a benefit, which then makes you willing to do it again and again.
absolutely, and, the point is that you've already been through the worst of it,
Yeah.
you know? It's never gonna be as bad, and people have a choice to make. It's gonna be maybe painful to go through this, but how much pain are you creating for yourself by not going through it?
Mhm.
I mean, we create more pain for ourselves by trying to run away from the pain. I mean, addictions are a typical example of people trying to run away from their pain and they create so much pain for themselves. So you can have two kinds of pain: the pain of suppressing yourself or the growing pains, such as you
Right.
described. So which pain would you rather have? That is not you have no choice of you have no choice not to have pain.
Yes.
Your choice is which kind of pain would you rather have? So for example, when to go back to our theme of saying no, when you say no, there's going to be some pain. Why? Because some people won't like you.
Mhm.
But which pain would you rather have? That pain of being authentic and some people not wanting to put up with that because that's not what they want from you. Or will you have the pain of suppressing yourself and then getting depressed or physically ill? So
Yeah,
there's a kind of what's been called a noble pain, which is the pain of growth and transformation, or the ignoble pain of trying to run away from all that.
right.
The only decision you got to make is which pain would you rather have?
Yeah, and what's the outcome you want? Because
Yeah.
in the noble pain, as you refer to it, you're working towards something, right? That
That's
you're actually healing and you're creating a more complete, authentic, self-actualized, enjoyable, fulfilling, peaceful life for yourself, right? And the other, you're it's short-term gain for long-term pain, I think.
That's exactly what it is, which is, by the way, the essence of addiction is
Yeah.
a short-term gain for long-term pain.
Yeah, there's so much there to talk about with addiction, with mental illness that we haven't even gotten to, but it all kind of stems from the same places as we were talking about physical illness. It's those parts of ourselves we can't be with, it's those old traumas and societal traumas that we're not really willing to look at or feel or process. And that the healing really comes in creating a partnership with those parts of ourselves,
And I
right?
think
That,
and I think it's really important to emphasize what you just said about the societal traumas because these things aren't personal. They're created by the whole culture. Um, Lots of studies show that experiences of racism affect the biology of racialized people because the mind and the body can't be separated. So racialized people of color, for example, they're more prone to get infected by COVID or to get sick from it or to die from it. Then we get more autoimmune disease, more high blood pressure. Their biology, their cells are age faster. These aren't genetically determined. These are the impact of social traumas. Again,
Yes.
I talked about women, about an indigenous woman in Canada has 6 times the rate of rheumatoid arthritis than that of anybody else. These people never used to have rheumatoid arthritis at all prior to colonization. And so,
Yes.
we have to keep in mind the larger and women in general, why they have all this autoimmune disease. It's because of the socially engendered, not trying to make a pun here, but the socially engendered gender role of being society shock absorbers. This can all be reversed, both on the emotional and on the social level, but we have to recognize them.
right. We have to attend to it in our own little microcosms, but also on the macro societal level as well.
Exactly.
All right. I have a big whopper of a question to ask you as we wrap up. I could talk to you for hours about all of this. But I don't know why I wanted to ask you this. You alluded to it a little bit toward the end as you were talking about psychedelics and healings. And you said you don't often use the word miracle. But what are your spiritual beliefs? And I'll tell you why I'm asking. It's not only to be, to intrude upon on you by asking you that, but because I have found for myself that such a huge part of my ability to heal and move through this horrific trauma has been finally, I mean, I feel like this is a big part of what will ultimately be the gift of this, although the gift is still revealing itself, is ultimately finally creating more of a two-way relationship with God, spirit, Allah, Jesus, whoever one's,
Yeah.
but for me, it's holy oneness is really my term for God. Um, do you have a relationship with spirit? Is that something that has evolved for you over time? I'm just curious because I feel it. I feel it in your words and in your actions and in your work, but you don't talk about it, at least from what I've seen.
No, I totally get what you're saying. Well, when it comes to spiritual practice, I'm really so undisciplined. So I said in one of my books, not in this one, or maybe in this one, I don't know. I have a profound relation with meditation. I think about it every day, but I
Mhm.
don't do it. So I'm the world's worst spiritually disciplined practitioner. At the same time, people do tell me that they feel kind of a spiritual sense emanating from my work and from my presence. other people are more aware than I am. I have not. Now look behind me. You can't see it, but there's a shelf of books, nothing but spiritual reading. Um, that's there because I'm comfortable with my mind, and to my mind, I can read these books and I can agree with them and understand what they're talking about. But I don't think I've had the depth of experience that I'm conscious of. That, for example, you describe about yourself or about some other people.
Mhm.
My wife, other friends of mine, they've had deep spiritual experiences they could actually describe. The closest I've come to it is when I've done various psychedelic shamanic healing practices I talk about in the book.
Yeah.
So, yes, I'm very much aware of, appreciate, believe in, but on the experiential level, um, I'm not there. That's the best I can tell you about it. And
Yeah.
when people say, maybe you've had these experiences, you're just not. Maybe my mind is just resisting.
Yeah.
I do have a very thick skull, and it's hard to get through it, and so it's quite possible that my mind even dismisses
Yeah.
some extent. Maybe I'm afraid of something, of losing my little egoic self if I open myself to spirit. I even aware of that fear, but honest to
Surrender.
God,
Yeah.
honest to God, on my slogan is I don't do surrender,
Yeah.
and so I'm aware of it. It's there. I believe in it. Not just on a level intellectually, but at the same time experientially, I've had glimpses of it.
Yeah.
That's that's all I can say.
Yeah, that makes sense to me also because you're so intelligent, right? And you operated so strongly in that left brain, that huge
Yeah,
left brain of yours, right? And
yeah,
so, I mean, I was the same way. I was very it was only really out of longing and necessity to connect. I think honestly, it was a desire to connect with Sammy that and to connect to the fact that I know energy never dies. It just
yeah.
changes form. I do know that for a fact. And so I really wanted to connect with his energy. And as I started to do that, it opened up connecting to oneness, right? And to the energy of all. And so that's how it sort of started for me. So sometimes it comes out of necessity, but I do think your intuition is almost and I don't mean just in this conversation because I've watched many of your videos and read your books, but your intuition is divinely inspired. It's not just intellectual and not just because you're, as Malcolm Gladwell would say, an outlier who's done thousands of, 10,000 hours of work in this. It is a channel. And so,
No, you know what? My intellect would never figure all this stuff out. I know it's
Yeah.
coming I know it's not coming from me, but through me.
yes.
Not that I haven't done some work to get me here, but y you know who Nijinsky was, the great Russian dancer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So about 100 years ago, he was the Bershnikov and Nureyev of his day, and he was once asked, I love this. He was once asked how he accomplishes one of these incredible leaps on stage, and he said, "I don't," he says. "When Nijinsky is there, it can't happen."
Mm. Yes.
And
Yes.
so I know that when I'm really grounded and speaking, something is coming through me that I'm not the source of. I'm quite aware of that, you know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
I feel that, and I think we all feel that, and we are so grateful for the beautiful soul that you are and for all that you offer us and all that you're doing in the world, and I see how hard you're working even talking about this amazing book, this amazing work that you and your son we didn't even get to your son, but that you and your son have worked on, and you have another you're gonna be bringing out another book together, right? About which I love this idea. I think it's so important because I hear from so many parents recently who are estranged from their children. It's about parents and adult children, right?
So we just did a workshop here in Vancouver this weekend, and we've done it in New York a month ago. It's called Hello Again, a fresh start for adult children and their parents with my son Daniel. And it's really is a powerful breakthrough. We're going to write a book about it. We're going to have a website about it. We're going to have a podcast about it. And in 2 years,
Wonderful.
in 2 years, we're going to have a book about it. And even now, there's some talks of us on YouTube, Hello Again, Gabor and Daniel Maté. So that's the next book that we're doing, yeah, and I think, um,
How wonderful that you're doing
it's
it together.
it's really and of course, in the process of getting to do it together, believe me, there's a lot of stuff to get to work through, you know?
Yeah, I'm facing that with my 26-year-old, and I just always remember what my mother always said to me when I would bring these things up is that I wanna be the kind of parent that can hear and listen to and own, you know, the ways I've messed up, and it ain't fun, but it's good.
Well, the next time we do the workshop, you might want to come with your son if he's open to it.
I would love to. I would
Yeah,
love to. You'll have to let it where can people learn more about what's coming?
at my website, drgabormaté.com. All my events are on there, but we'll probably do it in California in this coming year.
Oh, good. I will be there with bells on for sure.
Great. Yeah.
I would love to.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's wonderful to meet you.
You too. I am so we're all so grateful to you for who you are, what you bring, and for your beautiful heart and mind. So thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening and crying out loud with me. If something you heard today helped or made you feel less alone, please follow, share, and review. And for more tools and a community that deeply understands you and your pain, visit the Grief Healing Collective at drlauraberman.com/grief healing. I'll see you next time on Crying Out Loud.
There's a hollow in my chest where your laughter used to be. Space at every table, an empty seat I see. The woman I was before you left didn't make it through, but love is still alive in me and still there between us two. They say just let it be alright, just keep your pain inside. But love this deep and pain this true were never meant to hide. So I'm crying out loud, I'm not holding it in, not shrinking my heart or the shape I am in. If grief is the echo of love that resounds, then I will warn you crying out loud. Ooh. Some days grief's a tsunami, some days it's just a wave, some days I'm barely breathing, some days I feel so brave, but I am learning slowly what the breaking's about. The only way to freedom is feeling it out. Every tear that hits the ground is not a sign I'm weak. It's the sound of love still reaching, still learning how to speak. So I'm crying out loud, let the whole world see. Love didn't leave, it's alive in me, and the dark's a doorway if you let it be found. We don't heal by hiding, we heal crying out loud. What if the ache is holy? What if the wounds to go? What if the heart that's And I